gonna be myself, or I could be someone else. No one's stopping me now. I'm gonna skip my breaks, I'm gonna make mistakes. I just wanna feel alive. It's just what I do when I'm out, so.
Hey everyone, it's Brooke Bowen. I am just going to do a quick voiceover today to help you guys out. Today we are working on 7 steps to painting a realistic portrait. So I just did a really quick little tiny painting, itsy bitsy, tiny painting to go over some of the steps that I take to create a more realistic portrait. So first step that I take is that I want to block in the general shape and the outline. I usually do this with oil paint. Some people will actually draw it out with a pencil or transfer it and then block in the large shadow shapes with oil paint. I typically only really do it with the extra paints I have on my palette from my last painting. I don't worry too much about the color. Right now I'm just focusing on getting the getting all the proportions correct and making sure that I have the darks and the lights blocked in. So second, you want to then block in the shadows and the light, so we just talked about that. Third, you want to make the structure of the face change from a 2D shape where it's essentially a drawing into a 3D shape. So you can see here on this painting what I'm doing to do that. I'm trying to use the shadows, use the colors to create form, to move the form over so it looks like it's a 3D form rather than just I'm outlining it and it's flat. I actually do this by approaching each section separately. So like I'll do the eye and I'll work on trying to make the eye rounded and then connect that eye to the cheek and look at how that form changes. Some artists will do the entire face and just slowly make it more and more 3D as they go. So step number 4 is that I then check my proportions. I'm always checking to see if my proportions are correct, but I try, after I kind of get in the shapes for the most part on the face, I then try to take some time to dedicate to make sure that I'm getting the proportions correct again. Because sometimes you, especially as I'm doing like these small areas, you can get so caught up in these little details that it's hard to remember your proportions, and that's probably one of the most important things to make it look realistic, is making sure that the eyes are the right spacing, that the the mouth is the right spacing, nose, all the facial features are correct. And sometimes we try to put it, and honestly, I don't know many artists who can put it down first time and get the proportions correct every time. Most artists are always going back and always adjusting just a little bit at a time, adjusting where things are so they can correct the proportions. And this piece was so small, it wasn't always a very easy thing to do with getting the proportions correct. It was tiny, and getting all these little descriptive lines in there. Okay, so 5th step is that I then define my hard edges and my soft edges. So once I've created this 3D effect and then I've rechecked my proportions and made changes as I've needed, I usually, beforehand, I usually know where I want my hard edges and my soft edges to be. But once the face is in, it becomes easier for me to, instead of focusing on making it look like the person, I can then focus on some of the more artistic parts of the painting where I want there to be hard edges, where I want there to be soft edges. You're always going back and forth between different things that you need to have a successful painting. And hard and soft edges, I think, are a big thing to a successful painting. You can have all soft edges and have it be a successful painting, all hard edges and have it be a successful painting. But you have to pay attention to that and understand why you're doing that. Step number 6 is I then go back and I start refining the subject. So depending on the painting, I will go back and refine the most important part of the painting. So usually in a portrait, it's typically the face. So right here, I'm going back, I'm putting in some of these, some of the smaller details that will really end up making the painting pop. I try to put most of the contrast, most of the details, and the focus, all these small marks, I try to put where I want the focus of the painting to be, and less so on where I don't want the focus of the painting to be. So like the hair, I'm not so interested in how people react to the hair, but I'm very interested in how people react to the face. So I'll spend a lot of time putting lots of little details in the face, whereas I'm not putting as many small details into the hair. Whereas like with a full figure, especially in a landscape, I want to put some focus in the hair because I want the whole painting of the person to be the focus, not just this face, which would be essentially a very tiny part of the entire picture. I'd also put a lot more focus into the clothes. And step number 7 is I fill in the hair and the background. I usually do the background last, mostly because I like to steady my hand on the canvas with like my pinky finger. I have a tendency to do that, and if I paint the background first, then I get paint on my finger, and therefore I get paint everywhere. And so usually I always try to keep the background for last. And while I'm doing the background, I am also keeping in mind where I want those soft edges, usually around the hair, and where I want the hard edges. So thank you for joining me, and we'll see you next week.